Hey guys, tonight we dive into a Greek myth so oddly specific, so wonderfully uneventful, you might actually forget halfway through what we're even talking about, which honestly is kind of the point. Imagine the radiant god of the sun, Apollo himself, not blasting golden light across the heavens, but quietly mucking out cow stalls in a remote kingdom no one remembers. Yep, that actually happened. And no, you probably won't survive this story. Not because it's dangerous, but because it's so sleepy, so slow burn, that you may just dissolve gently into the pillow before the cows finish mooing. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it over there? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start high above the clouds, on the glowing marble terrace of Mount Olympus. The columns shine like pearl in the morning mist, and every breeze smells faintly of nectar and victory. Gods lounge on couches, sipping ambrosia, while minor deities juggle the responsibilities they never actually signed up for. And in the middle of it all is Apollo, sun god, music nerd, and full-time golden boy. He's radiant. Literally. You squint just looking at him. Flowing curls, bow slung across his back, lyre hanging at his hip. He's equal parts heartthrob and headache. And today, well, today he's not doing great. You see, Apollo has anger issues. Not full-blown Ares-style bloodlust, but more like, my feelings are hurt, so now I will scorch an entire village energy. And right now, those feelings are boiling over because Zeus dared to punish his favorite son for, let's just say, vaporizing a few folks without clearance. The specifics are hazy. Ancient scrolls mumble something about Apollo slaying the Cyclopes who forged Zeus's lightning bolts, allegedly out of revenge for the death of his son, Asclepius. Which, okay, very dramatic, very mythcore. But to Zeus, this was a bureaucratic violation with thunderous consequences. So what does Zeus do? He pulls the celestial equivalent of HR intervention, strips Apollo of his divine status temporarily, and yeets him down to earth with a curt, go learn humility. This is how you find yourself following the most glamorous deity of them all, as he crash lands, face first, into a field outside Thessaly. His chariot's gone. His hair's dusty. His sandals are not up to the task. And worst of all, no one down here seems to care that he's technically solar royalty. Enter King Admetus, a fairly decent ruler with a surprisingly well-organized cattle shed and a penchant for rescuing disgraced gods. When Apollo stumbles into his kingdom, bruised ego and all, Admetus offers him a job, not as court musician, not as prophet, but as a humble shepherd, a literal cowherd. Historians still argue whether this demotion was symbolic or purely punitive. Did Apollo really shovel cow dung? Or was it more of a poetic way to say he lived among the mortals? Either way, the image of the sun god holding a straw rake is just too good to pass up. And here's the kicker. Apollo takes the job. No smiting, no thunderous monologue, just a resigned shrug and a slightly bitter glance skyward. Because when you've been fired by your own dad, who also happens to be king of the gods, your options are pretty limited. He settles into a rhythm, wakes up at dawn, drives the herd, listens to birdsong and the endless chewing of cud. It's a far cry from the glittering halls of Olympus, but there's something oddly soothing about it, like a spa retreat with hooves. And here's a quirky bit. Ancient Greek sources often mention that during this period, Apollo was absurdly good at his job. Like, the cattle doubled in number. They sparkled. They mooed in harmony. Some even say they stopped pooping indoors. Was it divine influence or just excellent pasture management? Scholars can't quite agree. What they do agree on is that Apollo, sun god turned farmhand, stayed here for years, not weeks, not a mythological weekend, years. And the longer he stayed, the more mortal he seemed to become. He laughed more, played his lyre for the sheep, told stories to the stable boys. Sometimes he even forgot to glow. You picture him one quiet evening, sitting on a stone fence, watching a calf wobble through its first steps. The sky's painted with pastel streaks, and there's a hint of rain on the breeze. Apollo runs a hand through his now not-so-shiny hair and smiles. For a god who used to ride flaming chariots, he's surprisingly content to watch grass grow. But don't worry, he's still Apollo. Every so often, the cows start mooing in 7/8 time, or a nearby lyre bursts into spontaneous harmony. You can exile a god, but you can't fully deglamour him. And here, as night settles in over Thessaly, and a divine stable boy hums to himself beneath the stars, we drift a little deeper into this tale of fallen glory, reluctant friendship, and the quiet magic of just showing up for work, even when you used to rule the sun. You wake the next day with a crick in your neck and the faint smell of hay in your nose. Welcome back to Earth. Literally. Apollo is already up, brushing down one of the older oxen with the tenderness of someone who used to burn cities for fun. His tunic's a bit wrinkled. His divine glow has dimmed to more of a soft shimmer, like the light off a waxed melon. There's a rhythm here, and you fall into it quickly. Morning chores, midday grazing, late afternoon lyre practice beside a tree. If it weren't for the whole God in exile thing, this might just qualify as a pretty solid work-life balance. Admetus, to his credit, doesn't make a fuss. He's the kind of king who'll eat lunch beside his servants and knows every goat by name. He treats Apollo with a curious mix of respect and restraint, as if he's fully aware this is a celestial being, but also won't let him skip latrine duty. One afternoon, you hear him ask Apollo, "You ever miss Olympus?" Apollo shrugs. "Only the ambrosia and the acoustics." And maybe he's not lying. Because out here, in the rolling fields of Thessaly, things are, if not ideal, at least manageable. The cows are thriving. The sheep have developed suspiciously luxurious coats. Even the local grass seems to hum a little tune when Apollo walks by. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient Greeks believed gods frequently interacted with mortals, often disguising themselves or being punished with temporary banishment. Apollo's stint as a shepherd under Admetus is one of the rare examples where a god voluntarily takes on manual labor without dramatic protest or magical shortcuts. But here's where it gets interesting. One night, while the rest of the farm sleeps, you hear music. Not the usual sleepy plucking of strings, but a full composition. Rich, melodic, powerful. You find Apollo seated on a rock near the barn, lyre in hand, weaving notes that seem to pour directly from the stars. You sit beside him, quiet. "I'm trying something new," he murmurs. "Music that's meant to be forgotten. The kind that plays only once, then disappears." You blink. Why? He smiles without looking at you. Because not everything sacred has to last forever. And there it is, the soft rebirth of humility. Quirky tidbit. In later folk traditions, Apollo's music was said to calm wild animals and even make rocks cry. One obscure myth even claims a field of barley turned gold after Apollo played nearby, though historians remain deeply unconvinced. And speaking of barley, one of the local farmers, a square-jawed man named Talos, approaches with a request. His daughter is sick. Nothing deadly, just a long fever that won't go. The village healer is away. Could the strange, glowing shepherd help? You expect Apollo to wave his hands, conjure a cure, maybe blast the fever into another dimension, but instead, he walks the entire hour to Telos's house, kneels by the girl, places a damp cloth on her head, and hums. That's it. Just a low lullaby, barely audible. Her breathing eases. Her fever breaks by morning. Historians still argue whether Apollo used divine healing or just had great bedside manner. After all, he was also the god of medicine, though apparently his license had not been revoked with his divine title. Back at the palace, Admetus hears of it, says nothing. But that night, the kitchen sends Apollo an extra honey cake. No note, just cake. And honestly, that's better than any parade. Later that week, as you carry a bundle of straw through the stable, you overhear two of the younger herders whispering, "I think he's actually human now." No way. Did you see his hair shimmer last night? Still, he hasn't smote anyone in months. Apollo walks past, raising an eyebrow. "I can still hear you, you know." They freeze, then nod respectfully and go back to brushing their donkeys. You laugh. Apollo doesn't, but then he winks. And it's in these little moments, the jokes, the chores, the midnight lullabies, that something remarkable happens. You forget Apollo used to be a god. He becomes instead someone you trust, someone who listens, someone who, despite a resume filled with monster slaying and prophecy chanting, knows how to rinse a bucket and mend a fence. The transformation isn't instant. He still flinches when thunder rumbles, still gazes a bit too long at the horizon, as if waiting for a chariot that won't come. But you also catch him smiling more. He writes silly poems on barn doors, races chickens with the children, plays mock duets with the wind. And maybe, just maybe, this exile isn't a punishment. Maybe it's a practice, a rehearsal for something deeper than glory, a lesson in being human. You don't see it coming. One moment, the sun's gently rising. The goats are bleating with textbook enthusiasm, and Apollo is halfway through composing a lullaby for a calf who refuses to nap. And then, boom, literally, a thundercrack cleaves the sky like a divine reprimand. Everyone freezes. Well, everyone except Apollo, who groans and mutters something like, "Oh, for Mount Olympus's sake." You turn just in time to see Hermes. Yes, that Hermes, landing lightly in the courtyard, sandals winged and shimmering, his staff spinning casually like he's late for brunch with fate. "Message from the top," Hermes announces, brushing dust from his shoulders. "Apollo, your sentence is up. Olympus wants you back." Apollo doesn't move. A silence stretches like a goat-hide drum. And then he says, "No." Hermes pauses mid-scroll, eyes blinking. "I'm sorry. Did you say no?" Apollo nods, casually tossing a hay fork into a nearby pile. "Tell father I'm on vacation." Mainstream historical fact. According to myth, Apollo was indeed summoned back to Olympus after his punishment, though accounts vary on how enthusiastic he was about returning. Some say he raced back in a chariot of fire. Others suggest he took his time, possibly due to an unusually satisfying mortal experience. Hermes, clearly unprepared for rebellion, tries again. "You know you don't say no to Zeus, right?" Apollo shrugs. "Tell him it's a soft no, a not right now no." Hermes groans, flips his scroll, and vanishes in a puff of indignant wind. Everyone exhales. That evening, you and Apollo sit by the fire. He's unusually quiet, poking the coals with a stick like they owe him answers. You ask, why stay? He doesn't look at you, just says, "Because up there, everything's about being. Down here, it's about doing." You blink. That's kind of profound. He grins. "I read it on a farmer's bucket." And suddenly you realize something odd. Apollo's settled, like a wind that finally found a valley to rest in. Quirky tidbit. There's a fringe theory among mythology fans that Apollo faked his punishment just to get a break from divine politics. Think of it as the world's first sabbatical. Over the next few days, the tension fades. The cows go back to chewing. The goats stop plotting chaos. And Apollo? He leans in. He starts sketching constellations in the dirt for local kids, turning myths into bedtime stories. He organizes an informal choir among the herders, and surprisingly, Theros the pig keeper has a voice that could melt bronze. You help him design new lyre strings from flax and gut, testing tones beside the river. One string breaks mid-tune and whips across your cheek, leaving a faint line. Apollo apologizes with a bucket of fresh figs. Sympathy fruit, he calls it. Historians still argue whether Apollo genuinely found meaning in his time with mortals, or simply endured it with style. But the songs he composed during this era, short, wistful, sun-drenched, hint at something more tender than exile. Then, one evening, a festival rolls through. It's not a big one, just a harvest celebration from a nearby village. But there's dancing and spiced bread and a makeshift stage that looks like it might collapse under too much poetry. Apollo's invited. At first, he refuses, says he's retired, says he's rebranding. But eventually, with a nudge from you and an enthusiastic sheep named Petra, he agrees. And when he steps onto that stage, lyre slung over one shoulder, the whole village goes still. No divine glow, no floating, just Apollo, standing barefoot in the dirt, singing a lullaby about the sun missing its favorite hill. It's devastating. Even the chickens look misty-eyed. And when he finishes, no one claps. They just breathe in that deep, slow way people do when something inside them just got softly rearranged. Later, you walk home together under a spill of stars. He says, "That was the first time I played a song I didn't want remembered." You ask why. He just smiles. Because it wasn't mine. It was theirs. And that's the thing. Gods tend to hog the spotlight. But out here, in the fields and barns, among clumsy sheep and half-tuned flutes, Apollo finds something he never expected. He finds enough. The seasons start to shift. The olive trees sigh with heat. The crickets stage a symphony at dusk. And Apollo, well, Apollo starts wearing a hat. Not just any hat. A wide-brimmed, utterly ridiculous straw monstrosity he claims helps filter the solar essence. You suspect it's because he's sunburned his ears one too many times. Either way, no one dares question him. Not even Petra the sheep, who now follows him everywhere like a star-struck groupie. Days drift by in a haze of song, sweat, and sun. You're learning more about goats than you ever wanted to know. Like how they can open latches, sabotage fences, and chew through scrolls with almost academic precision. One afternoon, as you're helping Apollo scrub an ink stain out of his tunic, spoiler, it's not coming out, he casually drops a bombshell. "So I'm thinking of staying longer." You nearly drop the tunic. Like, permanently? He shrugs. "I haven't set the lyre on fire yet," which is a good sign. Mainstream historical fact. In some localized Greek traditions, Apollo is said to have returned to Earth multiple times after his formal reinstatement, often in disguise. A few even claimed he wandered the countryside as a healer or musician, preferring quiet fame over thunderbolts and chariots. Besides, he adds, Olympus will still be there, but Petra won't live forever. The sheep in question bleats indignantly, as if offended by her mortality. You smile. "So, what now?" He looks thoughtful. "I want to try something different. Something useful. Something the gods never do." "Like what?" He raises an eyebrow. "Like fixing the village's broken water wheel." You blink. You're Apollo. You control plagues, music, and light. You want to be a repairman? He nods. "And I want to be good at it." And so begins Apollo's next divine detour. Local infrastructure. Quirky tidbit. A fringe group of classicists once argued that Apollo was the original Greek influencer, not for his poetry or prophecies, but because he made being competent fashionable. Fixing a broken gate? Divine. Teaching villagers to tune a harp? Legendary. You help him study the wheel, its crooked spokes, warped beams, and persistent squeaks. He brings out a scroll of blueprints drawn entirely in musical notation, easier to remember. The villagers, at first confused, soon get used to the sight of a sun god muttering at splinters and realigning water flow with a stick. And honestly, he's not half bad. He even builds a sundial that tells time and compliments you. Every hour, a little bronze bell rings out something like, "You're doing great," or "Nice tunic." It's weirdly motivating. Historians still argue whether this era of Apollo's life influenced certain rustic depictions in later art. Sun gods wearing aprons, cradling baskets of figs, or assisting with roof repairs. Most dismiss it as allegory. But maybe, just maybe, there's a grain of truth under the fresco. And then the omen comes. It starts with a bird, a crow, to be specific, flying in tight spirals overhead while screaming in what can only be described as divine Morse code. Apollo watches, frowns, and mutters, "Here we go." He grabs a stick, draws a complicated symbol in the dirt, and sighs. "What is it?" you ask. "A calling from Olympus." You wait. He doesn't move. And then, lightning. Clear blue sky. No clouds. Just a bolt. Straight down, inches from his foot. It scorches the grass and leaves behind a single, glittering feather. Apollo winces. "That's not subtle. Is it always this dramatic?" He nods. "You should have seen the time they sent a whole flaming chariot to pick me up from therapy." Still, he doesn't move. That night, he sits by the water wheel, turning a wooden gear over in his hands. His expression is unreadable. You sit beside him, and finally, he says, "You know what the worst part of being a god is?" You shake your head. "Nothing ever changes." Not really. Olympus is beautiful, sure, but it's also static, predictable, eternal in the most boring way possible. Down here, every day's a surprise. A goat escapes. A wheel breaks. Someone writes a bad love poem and blames the wind. You smile. You like the mess. He nods. I love the mess. Then he stands, walks to the sundial, and turns the little compliment bell upside down. Silence. He looks at you and says, "Just in case I have to leave." And you feel it. That old creeping thing. Not dread. Not exactly sadness. But the awareness that this chapter is closer to its end than its middle. The birds are watching again. And Olympus doesn't take no for an answer. You wake to the sound of music, but it's off. Apollo's usual sunrise melodies are crisp, hypnotic, borderline celestial. This one sounds more like a drunken liar falling downstairs. You stumble outside, bleary-eyed, and find him hunched over his instrument, strumming with the focus of someone trying to ward off a divine subpoena. His brows are furrowed. The strings vibrate angrily. Everything okay?" He looks up, startled. "Oh, yeah, just composing. Sounds like you're losing an argument with your muse." He sighs. "It's a counter-charm. Something to stall Olympus." You blink. You're trying to fight Mount Olympus with a song, He nods. Look, I didn't say it was a good plan. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient Greeks genuinely believed that music had power over the divine. Orpheus could calm beasts and move stones. The Pythagoreans even mapped out musical ratios as keys to the universe. Apollo wasn't just a bard. He was the bard. In some myths, his songs healed diseases, quelled rebellions, and lulled gods to sleep. So you think if you play badly enough, they might leave me alone out of secondhand embarrassment. Quirky tidbit. One obscure fragment hints at a discordant ode Apollo once played that caused an entire flock of harpies to vomit midair. Scholars debate whether this was meant metaphorically or was just really bad harp work. You watch as he plucks at another chord. A flower wilts, not promising. Still, the villagers don't seem to mind. They gather for an impromptu breakfast concert. One old man brings figs. A child offers Apollo a drawing of him battling a thundercloud with a lyre. It's shockingly accurate. And for a moment, Olympus seems far away. The world is simple, full of warm bread, cracked notes, and laughter. But by midday, the sky bruises at the edges, a soft roll of thunder, then another, and then a peacock feather falls from nowhere, gently spiraling to the ground. You know whose feather that is. Hera, queen of the gods, patron of grudges. Not exactly a fan of wayward sun gods who shirk divine duties for goat herding and municipal plumbing. Apollo's face darkens. This is serious? You look up. What now? I need time, he mutters. One more day. One more human day. So he does what any panicked god does. Throws a festival. Within hours, the village square is decorated in citrus peels, flower garlands, and every spare ribbon in a 10-mile radius. There are tables piled high with honey cakes, roasted olives, fermented grape juice that could power a cart. Apollo even repurposes the water wheel into a spinning dance floor. It's wildly impractical, and no one has the heart to tell him. Historians still argue whether festivals in rural Greece were originally community gatherings or thinly veiled acts of divine bribery. Either way, records show that spontaneous parties involving song, feasting, and questionable rituals were not uncommon, especially in times of stress, or boredom, or both. You join the crowd, swept up in the chaos. There's a goat in a toga, a flute solo that ends in applause and a small fire. A toddler manages to paint a surprisingly accurate fresco of Apollo with a plunger. And through it all, the sun god smiles. He doesn't sing, doesn't preach, just exists among mortals for once, not above them. That night, as lanterns flicker and the music fades, you find Apollo sitting on the temple steps, barefoot, robe loosened, a fig in one hand and a mostly eaten honey cake in the other. He gestures to the sky. You ever think about how the stars don't really twinkle? You tilt your head. They don't? It's just atmospheric distortion. Earth's little shimmer filter. Olympus, no shimmer. Just cold, perfect light. He pops the last bite of honey cake in his mouth. I think I like the shimmer better. You don't say anything, because neither of you want to ruin it. But you both know the shimmer never lasts. Not for gods, not for humans, not for anyone who loves the mess too much to stay untouched by it. The next morning, Apollo is gone. No note, no cryptic prophecy, not even a half-eaten honey cake, just a distinct absence, like when someone takes the sun out of the sky, but leaves the heat behind. You wander around, hoping he's off crafting another ridiculous irrigation upgrade, or arguing with a beehive, but no one's seen him. Not even the temple pigeons, and they usually know everything. Then, just before noon, he returns, dragging a giant marble sundial. You stand in the path, dumbfounded. Where did you get that? Don't ask, he grunts, sweating under divine strain. Might have borrowed it from a temple. Might have bartered it from a titan. Who knows? Mainstream historical fact. Sundials were indeed used by the ancient Greeks, and the oldest known Greek sundial, carved from stone, dates back to the 3rd century BCE. However, they were often poorly calibrated, wildly impractical on cloudy days, and only useful if you knew how to read them, which, ironically, most farmers did not. Quirky tidbit. There's a single mention in a now-lost comedic play of a talking sundial that constantly reminded citizens of their laziness. Some scholars believe it was an early satirical jab at civic timekeeping efforts. Apollo slaps the dial into the center of the village square. Dust swirls. Pigeons flee. An old woman curses under her breath. You raise an eyebrow. Trying to fix time now? No, he pants, hands on hips. Trying to measure it. Need to know exactly how long I have before Olympus comes down like a hailstorm of metaphors. You glance up. The clouds look innocent. Too innocent. Around the sundial, villagers begin to gather. Some touch it, like it might grant wisdom. Others poke it and walk away, unimpressed. A child kicks a pebble and yells, "Look, time moved." Apollo grins faintly. See? Already educational. He spends the afternoon sketching shadow angles in the dirt and arguing with the baker about equinox math. You mostly watch and wonder, why doesn't he just leave? He's a god, a divine entity of light, healing, and catastrophic poetry. He could teleport out of here with a wink and a golden fart cloud, but he stays, helps fix that broken wine press, teaches a girl how to tune a lyre, pats a donkey on the head, and mutters something in ancient celestial tongue that makes the donkey bray like it just won the lottery. Go. Later, you sit beside him on the steps of the little temple, watching shadows stretch across the sundial. He nudges you with his elbow. Ever wish you didn't have to grow up? You snort. What makes you think I have? He laughs. Fair. He holds up a half-burnt fig leaf. The thing is, when you're divine, people expect you to always know. To be bright, certain, right. He pauses. It's exhausting. You don't answer. Just nod. Because what is there to say? You've never carried a sunbeam or held the strings of fate. But you do know the weight of expectation, of needing to glow, even when you're dimming. Historians still argue whether the gods of Olympus were ever meant to be relatable. Some believe their dramas mirrored human flaws deliberately to teach. Others insist it was just ancient writers projecting wildly. Either way, Apollo has never seemed more human than now, swatting away a mosquito with the same frustration as anyone else. As the sky deepens into bronze, Apollo starts carving something into the base of the sundial. You lean closer. It's not a poem, not a prophecy, just 3 words. Still here, trying. You stare at them. The chisel marks are uneven. The words aren't centered, but it's perfect, because what else is anyone doing? Still here, trying, even gods, even you. Apollo starts waking up before dawn, which is deeply unfair for everyone else who's still just trying to survive until breakfast. You hear him outside before the sun even brushes the hills, humming some celestial tune that sounds suspiciously like a lullaby sung in reverse. He's feeding the chickens again, even though the chickens have grown visibly terrified of him and now lay eggs out of sheer divine anxiety. By the time you shuffle outside, blinking like a cave bat, he's already halfway through sketching a new layout for the village waterworks. This time, featuring elevated bamboo aqueducts, a pulley-operated water lifting system, and something that might actually be a divine espresso bar. He doesn't say that, but you can see the glow in his eyes. He misses Olympus's ambrosia shots. Mainstream historical fact: the Greeks did experiment with primitive water lifting devices like the shadoof and later the Archimedean screw. But the infrastructure for rural water distribution was crude. Irrigation was often handled manually or with simple canals, relying heavily on rainfall and seasonal flooding. Quirky tidbit: there are surviving vase paintings that seem to depict gods assisting mortals with irrigation and farming, though scholars still argue whether these are symbolic representations or just artistic licenses taken by bored potters. You watch as Apollo explains gravity using 2 jars and a jug of goat milk. It's messy. The goat is unamused, but the children are delighted, and one even asks if gravity can be turned off on feast days. Apollo replies, very seriously, only if Zeus blinks. No one dares to ask what happens if Zeus sneezes. Later that day, he takes you on a walk past the olive groves. It's quiet, peaceful. Even the cicadas seem to be whispering. I've been thinking, he says, twirling an olive branch like it's a baton of destiny. Maybe I needed this. You raise an eyebrow. A mortal vacation? A mortal correction, he replies. When you're up there too long, you forget what things smell like. Dirt, rain, burnt goat cheese. He pauses, eyes far away. You forget what it feels like to be ignored, to fail, to have calluses on your fingers. You blink. You've been building sundials, not digging canals. Still counts, he grins. Historians still argue whether ancient myths, like Apollo's exile, were created to humble the gods in public imagination, or to reassure mortals that even divinity came with a cost. Some say it's a metaphor for accountability. Others say it was just a great excuse for comedic relief in otherwise grim legends. But for now, Apollo just feels grounded. You return to the village and see something unexpected. He's drawn a small crowd, not worshippers, not fanatics, just people, curious, waiting. He steps up to the stone he's been using as a soapbox and reads a story. A tale of the sun chasing the moon, of music chasing silence, of gods learning to listen. His voice is soft, not commanding, not like thunder, more like rainfall. You glance around. There are smiles, tears, a few confused goats, and something shifts, not in the sky, not in Olympus, but down here, in the dirt, in the real. Apollo steps down and hands his reed pen to a young girl. She hesitates, then scribbles a flower. No divine lightning, no curses, just the beginning of something. Maybe belief, maybe trust, maybe both. That night, you and Apollo sit beneath the stars, trading stories, not myths, just memories. He tells you about a time he accidentally invented echo chambers in a cave. You tell him about the time you fell into a vat of fish brine and smelled like Poseidon's laundry for 3 days. You laugh. He laughs. The stars blink overhead, ancient and uninterested. But you're very interested because you start to wonder, what happens when a god decides to stay? Not just visit, not just meddle, but stay. When he stops being a symbol and starts being a person. By now, the villagers have stopped flinching every time Apollo speaks, which is progress. They no longer expect thunderbolts when he clears his throat. No animals spontaneously combust when he sings. And yesterday, a toddler threw a pebble at him and called him Sunface. He laughed. Everyone lived. A triumph. You notice something else, too. He's listening more. Not just hearing. Really listening. To the gossip by the well. The low hum of market traders bartering over olives. The quiet sighs of the old woman who sits near the fig tree and mutters things only the bees seem to understand. He stops trying to solve everything with divine intervention. No more flame-proofed loaves of bread. No more blessing the blacksmith's hammer until it melts through his workbench. Instead, he asks questions. What hurts? What helps? What's missing? Mainstream historical fact. In early Greek society, especially in city-states like Athens, healing and medicine were community-based and involved a combination of practical treatments and religious rituals. Gods like Apollo and Asclepius were invoked for healing, but much of the real work came from observation, routine care, and trial and error methods. Quirky tidbit. Some temples of Asclepius kept snakes that were allowed to slither freely around sleeping patients, under the belief that the snakes carried divine healing powers. Not recommended if you're squeamish. Apollo tries to channel some of that energy. Without the snakes, he starts shadowing the village healer, an old man named Thanos. Not the cosmic one. This Thanos is missing 3 teeth and has a limp from a very suspicious goat. Apollo watches him grind herbs, bind wounds, tell off children for licking rocks. He doesn't interrupt, not even when Thanos says something blatantly incorrect about the liver's ability to predict weather. He just nods thoughtfully. Learning restraint? You whisper one morning, catching him pausing mid-glow. Learning to shut up, he replies, smiling. Turns out it's harder than archery. Historians still argue whether Apollo's mythical stint as a mortal servant was originally told as a punishment narrative or as a redemptive arc. The ancient playwright Euripides lean toward the tragic, while later poets found comedy in watching an all-powerful being accidentally pickle onions instead of curing plagues. You lean toward the latter, because there's nothing quite like seeing Apollo, Lord of Light, standing ankle-deep in turnip brine, muttering, "Too much time, not enough dignity." One evening, you catch him staring at the sky again, but this time he looks hesitant. "Do you ever miss it?" you ask. He shrugs. Some parts. The views, the robes, the ability to smite people for bad poetry. Tempted to go back? He hesitates longer this time. "There's something about being needed," he finally says. "Here, if I fix a fence, someone sleeps better. If I carry water, someone drinks. It's simple. It matters. Up there, everything gets lost in clouds." And you realize something. He's healing, not just from exile, not from some dramatic celestial punishment. He's healing from importance, from always being on, always being seen, always being perfect. Down here, he gets to fail, gets to sweat, gets to laugh, and those things, strangely enough, might be divine in their own way. The next morning, he's back at the well, helping a child haul up a bucket. It slips, soaks them both. He laughs, dripping, and hands the kid a fig. Later, he sketches a new design for shade sails in the market. Uses goat hide, tests wind resistance with a chicken feather. The science is dubious. The vibe is immaculate. You think about how strange it is. How a story that started with wrath, with fiery arrows and divine tantrums, has softened into this. A barefoot god, crouching in the dirt, teaching a 5-year-old how to tell time by the shadows of leaves. You wonder how many myths we got wrong, how many gods just wanted a break. A chance to be mortal, to try, to learn, to do something useful. Maybe Apollo isn't trying to prove anything anymore. Maybe he's just living. And honestly, that's more impressive than a golden chariot any day. You wake up to find Apollo completely fixated on bees. Yes, bees. The god who once sang the world into bloom is now crouched in a field with his nose inches from a buzzing hive, murmuring, "Fascinating. Their work ethic rivals Hermes on commission." He's taken up beekeeping, sort of. Mostly, he's just standing there, being mesmerizing, while bees occasionally land on his eyebrows. You try to remind him gently that you're still technically on probation from Olympus, and maybe shouldn't provoke divine allergic reactions. He waves you off. "Bees respect me," he says solemnly. "We understand each other. I radiate pollen energy. To your knowledge, that is not a thing." But you let him have it. That week, he declares honey the most mortal miracle and begins experimenting. Honeyed herbs for sore throats. Honey and vinegar salves for cuts. Honey stirred into clay for what he insists is a deeply rejuvenating face mask. It looks like he face planted into breakfast. Mainstream historical fact. The ancient Greeks revered honey not only as a food, but also as a healing substance. Hippocrates prescribed it for wounds, and honey was often used in embalming rituals. Beekeeping was a respected practice, with elaborate hives carved into ceramics and wood. Quirky tidbit. Some Greek temples kept sacred bees and considered their hives or swarms omens. If bees left the hive suddenly, it meant someone in the household was about to die. Cheerful stuff. Apollo decides bees are sacred. He makes a wreath of wax and thyme and declares a corner of the field a temple of gentle buzzing. The villagers nod politely. They've seen worse. Remember the week he tried to teach roosters harmony? One afternoon, you spot him sketching something in the dirt. A complex spiral of symbols, some Greek, some unfamiliar, all intricate. What is it, you ask? Mapping the frequency of bee dances. Of course, you sit beside him and watch as he carefully charts the waggle movements with the reverence of a mathematician discovering infinity. This is what I missed, he says softly. Bees? No, he replies. Curiosity, purpose without pressure, doing something not because I must, but because I wonder. You nod, you get it. The divine weight of Olympus didn't allow for wondering, just knowing, proclaiming, performing. But down here, in the hum of insects and dust, he's allowed to ask stupid questions and chase unimportant truths. And that makes them feel important. Historians still argue whether Apollo's depictions in later texts, calmer, more lyrical, were the result of older myth cycles being softened for public plays, or a cultural shift toward valuing contemplation over conquest. Either way, the god of sun and song eventually became a god of healing, music, and yes, bees. He starts offering honey to the villagers, small jars, clumsily labeled with scratchy pictograms, some infused with lavender, some with a sprig of mint. Everyone insists it's the best honey they've ever tasted. You suspect it's less about flavor and more about the absurd joy of receiving artisanal goods from a semi-retired deity. The kids begin calling him Uncle Buzz. He pretends to hate it. One night, you find him sitting beside the hive in silence. The moon is high. The bees are still. He holds a tiny jar in his palm. For the fates, he whispers. You frown. Do they like honey? He grins. No idea. But it's the best thing I've made in years. Might as well send them a sample. Maybe they'll forgive the whole sun chariot incident. You imagine the three old goddesses, spindle in hand, licking honey off their knuckles and sighing, "Fine, let him finish the probation." The next morning, you discover a woven basket beside your sleeping mat. Inside, a reed pen, a folded cloth, and a small sealed jar of Apollo's honey. No note, just a smear of golden wax shaped like a sun. He doesn't say anything when you show it to him, just smiles and goes back to sketching the hive. But you understand, he's beginning to say goodbye, not dramatically, not with a thunderclap, but gently, in bee speak. You wonder how much of Olympus was ever real. How much was just ceremony, just image, just thunderclouds hiding the need to feel something. Down here, in the dust and dandelions, Apollo's legacy isn't temples or hymns. It's stained fingers, slightly burned honey, an olive sapling he planted behind the healer's hut, and a village that will, for centuries, whisper, "Remember when the sun god taught us about bees?" They won't remember everything, but they'll remember that. The day starts hot and strange. You wake to Apollo arguing with a goose, not metaphorically, a literal, flapping, honking goose. Respectfully, he says, holding a cracked amphora lid like a shield, this is my bathwater. The goose honks in firm disagreement. You sigh, roll over, and pull the sheet over your head. Another day with the world's most melodramatic demigod. Later, over breakfast, flatbread, olives, and what Apollo claims is his signature honey lavender drizzle. He decides it's time to expand his mortal resume. I've done healing. I've done music. I've communed with bees. He ticks them off on olive-oiled fingers. Now, I shall try manual labor. You stare at him, chewing. Like carpentry? Exactly. You squint. You've never built anything in your immortal life. He beams. That's the point. Growth. So off you go. Into the village, where poor, unsuspecting craftspeople are about to have their work days enlightened by the god of the sun. Now, wielding a chisel, you start with the potters. Apollo walks in like a golden retriever in a ceramic studio, excited, clueless, and immediately in danger of breaking something. They give him a lump of clay and a wheel. He pokes it like it might bite him. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient Greek pottery was an art and a science. Potters shaped vessels on foot-powered wheels and painted them with scenes from daily life and mythology using slip, a type of fine clay wash. Firing involved multiple stages and temperature shifts, which gave Greek pottery its distinctive red and black finishes. Quirky tidbit. The painters sometimes inserted little jokes or subtle insults into the designs. Tiny satyrs with exaggerated features or animals peeking where they shouldn't. Pottery wasn't just functional. It had sass. Apollo's pot is ambitious. It starts off as a bowl, then becomes a vase, then something he claims is a symbolic vessel of transformation. It collapses in on itself like a philosophical souffle. The potters applaud politely. One suggests he explore sculpture instead. So naturally, you're off to the woodshop next. Apollo admires the planes and chisels like sacred relics. He carves for a while, tongue poking out the side of his mouth like a child drawing stars. The final product is a very wobbly stool with 3 uneven legs and a sunburst scratched into the seat. The carpenter gives it a long look and says, "It's got personality." You make a mental note never to sit on it. By mid-afternoon, Apollo is sweaty, dusty, and thrilled. "I feel so useful," he declares, fanning himself with a broken roof tile. He insists on helping the roofers next. You intervene before he ascends a ladder with a hammer in one hand and a lyre in the other. It feels like a bad omen waiting to happen, so you guide him toward the dye vats. It seems safer. He spends an hour stirring linen through deep pots of crushed murex, saffron, and indigo, his face streaked with purple and blue. He dubs himself Apollo of the apron. You will never get the stains out of his tunic. Historians still argue whether gods working among mortals was ever believed literally or just used as poetic allegory for natural phenomena, like Apollo, representing the daily labor of the sun. Either way, stories of gods walking the earth abound, and they almost always end with something getting weird. As you leave the dye house, Apollo stops to admire a robe hung to dry in the sun. It's unevenly dyed, speckled from a gust of wind that scattered ashes from a nearby fire. It's ruined, the weaver laments. Apollo steps closer, tilts his head. No, he says softly. It's accidental truth. You roll your eyes, but the weaver smiles. They hang the robe inside the shrine the next day. The god of perfection is learning to admire flaws. That night, Apollo soaks in his favorite basin, now goose-free, and hums a tune that feels older than language. You sit beside him, arms resting on your knees, staring at the sky, turning bronze and violet. Maybe I'll try farming next, he murmurs. You groan. Please don't. But secretly, you can't wait. Because even when he's awful at something, he's in it, not above it. Not floating somewhere on a golden throne judging your workbench. He's here, in the dirt and dye and cracked clay, trying, failing, laughing, starting over. And maybe that's what makes this little exile so lovely. It's not the lessons or the humility or even the honey. It's the fact that, for once, Apollo isn't the sun circling the world. He's just a guy in a too short apron who wants to learn how to make a pot. And maybe you are too. You wake to find Apollo missing. Not missing like he left a note and went for figs, but missing like his bed is perfectly made and there's a suspicious trail of hoof prints near the olive grove. You follow them, because of course you do. The tracks wind through the dew-wet grass, past startled sheep and one highly offended tortoise, and lead you to a hill where the most ridiculous sight awaits. Apollo is herding goats in a toga, with a lyre slung across his back like a medieval fanny pack. You're up early, he calls, as though you haven't just hiked half a mile to find him living your weirdest pastoral fantasy. What are you doing? He beams. Agricultural labor. You blink. You're babysitting goats. I prefer to call it divine animal management. He nudges a particularly stubborn billy goat with his toe. The goat, unimpressed by celestial credentials, headbutts him square in the thigh. He yelps. You try not to laugh. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient Greece relied heavily on herding and animal husbandry, particularly in rugged regions where farming was difficult. Goats were prized for their milk, meat, and ability to thrive in rocky terrain. Herders often led semi-nomadic lives, sleeping under stars and protecting flocks with nothing but staffs and dogs. Quirky tidbit. Some Greek city-states had laws regulating who could herd livestock where, and disputes over grazing rights occasionally escalated into full-on neighbor feuds. Nothing like a goat stepping over the wrong invisible boundary to ruin diplomacy. Apollo, it turns out, is terrible at herding. He keeps trying to use his lyre to soothe the herd. The goats remain stubbornly unsoothed. Eventually, you convince him to let the actual shepherd take over, and you guide him down the hill for a new adventure. I need something more structured, he muses. Something scholarly. You raise an eyebrow. Like reading? No, he says gravely. Teaching. You wonder briefly if Zeus is watching this unfold like a reality show. The town school is a modest affair. Low walls, dusty floor, a collection of wax tablets, and students who have no idea they're about to be educated by an incognito god. Apollo enters like a man who's just discovered theater. He picks up a stylus with reverence. He gestures broadly. He recites the alphabet like he's casting a spell. The children stare at him in confused awe. Then he starts a lesson on poetry. "Children," he declares, "words are the threads of your soul's tapestry." One boy sneezes on his own tablet. You sit in the back, trying not to grin as Apollo launches into an impromptu performance of an Orphic hymn, complete with hand gestures. A girl raises her hand. "Do the muses like goats?" "Very much," he answers solemnly. "Calliope had a pet one named Biscuit." You are almost certain that's not true. Historians still argue whether the muses were viewed as literal beings or symbolic representations of divine inspiration. Apollo, associated with the muses through his musical and poetic aspects, was often depicted leading them in song or dance, especially in later Roman art. By midday, he has turned the classroom into a blend of storytelling circle, improvisational concert, and wildly speculative trivia game. The children adore him. The schoolmaster looks mildly terrified. During lunch, Apollo sits cross-legged in the courtyard, surrounded by eager kids asking about the stars, the seasons, and whether thunder is just Zeus sneezing. He answers every question with total seriousness, even the weird ones, especially the weird ones. Quirky fact: ancient Greek education varied depending on class and region, but it generally included literacy, arithmetic, music, and physical training. In wealthier cities, boys might also study rhetoric and philosophy. Girls were typically educated at home, unless, of course, they snuck into a class run by a radiant blonde with questionable lesson plans. You lean against a pillar and watch him scribble a diagram of the solar system using a stick and a patch of sand. It's wrong, but charmingly so. That evening, as the sun slips low, Apollo kneels to help one of the youngest students trace letters in wax. His voice is soft, patient. You recognize something in his expression, something quieter than pride, something deeper than performance. He wants them to understand, to feel what he feels when he strings a melody or recites a perfect line. Not just to copy, but to create. That night, after the kids are sent home and the classroom swept, he lingers, sits on the steps, looks up at the stars. "They're so far," he murmurs, "and yet everything I've loved is here." You sit beside him, shoulder to shoulder. Neither of you speaks for a long time. Sometimes, teaching is just a way of remembering how it felt to be small and curious. And sometimes, falling from heaven just means you finally landed somewhere real. The next morning, Apollo surprises you again. He's awake before dawn. This time, not to herd goats, not to dazzle children, but to walk into a modest, whitewashed temple with a broom. You pause at the threshold, squinting through the sleepy light, wondering if you've misunderstood. But no, he's sweeping. The god of light, poetry, and prophecy is sweeping out dust bunnies like it's a spiritual rite. "Priest called in sick," he says over his shoulder. "Figured I'd pitch in, because that's what gods do," you murmur. He shrugs, but there's a flicker of mischief in his eyes. "Hey, humility is a form of worship too." You sit on a bench and watch him clear incense ash and stray flower petals from the temple floor. There's something oddly reverent about the way he does it. Measured, slow, like each motion has a secret meaning. Mainstream, historical fact. Ancient Greek temples were more than just places of worship. They were community hubs, spaces for offerings, festivals, and sometimes even record keeping. Keeping them clean and orderly wasn't just respectful, it was essential to maintaining favor with the gods. Quirky tidbit. Some temples employed official sweepers or caretakers whose duties ranged from cleaning altars to ensuring the statues were appropriately clothed and perfumed. Yes, divine hygiene mattered. Apollo lights a small oil lamp at the altar, offering a quiet hum of melody as the flame dances. You can't tell if it's an ancient hymn or just something he's composing on the spot. Then comes the offering bowl. He fills it with figs, a ribbon of honey, and a tiny carved lyre, a gesture so on brand it might as well be a signature. Humans need rituals, he says softly, not because the gods demand it, but because the soul forgets what it loves without reminders. You don't answer. You don't need to. The scent of myrrh curls in the air, clinging to your clothes. Later, Apollo insists on joining the market patrol. Apparently, local disputes have flared up again, this time over olive oil pricing. You follow him past rows of jars, dates, and gossip. Two elderly men are locked in a heated argument about whether someone watered down a batch of oil. Apollo steps between them, calm and smiling, hands raised in diplomatic flair. "Gentlemen," he says, "let us test the oil not with flame, but with fairness." You can practically hear a lyre twang somewhere in the distance. He proposes a challenge. Both sellers pour a small cup of oil. He sniffs, swirls, tastes, declares both slightly rancid, suggests they go in together on a fresher batch, split the cost, and corner the honest olive oil market. Somehow this works. One man slaps the other on the back and shouts, "To divine business partnerships." Apollo bows. You stare at him in disbelief. "You just invented ancient customer service," you whisper. He winks. "Don't underestimate the god of medicine and deals." Historians still argue whether markets in classical cities were more cooperative or cutthroat. Evidence from Athenian agoras suggests both existed. Price regulations coexisted with underhanded trade tricks, and reputation mattered as much as inventory. The market calms, and Apollo strolls away like a man who just solved world hunger with an olive pit. You spend the rest of the afternoon beneath a cypress tree, where he decides to compose a new hymn in honor of economic diplomacy. You doze off around stanza 5. When you wake, he's humming softly, arms behind his head, eyes half closed to the sun filtering through the branches. "Think they'll remember me?" he asks. The question is casual, but the tone isn't. You tilt your head. "The people here?" He nods. "Not as a god, just as a helper, a teacher, a sweeper of temples and saver of olive oil arguments." You smile. "You'll be a story. That's better." He doesn't reply, but he looks up at the sky for a long, long time. That evening, a thunderstorm rolls in across the hills. Thick clouds swallow the stars. You and Apollo take cover beneath a tiled roof, rain drumming like hoofbeats overhead. A child races by, barefoot and laughing. A dog chases after. Apollo watches them go, then whispers, I used to think power was enlightening. And now he looks at you. I think it's in the quiet. The storm doesn't end quickly. You and Apollo remain huddled beneath the slanted roof for what feels like hours. The air smells like wet stone, time crushed underfoot, and that strange sweetness that always follows lightning. He says nothing for a long time, simply watching the rivulets trace down the terracotta tiles. Eventually, you speak. Ever miss it? He doesn't pretend to misunderstand. Olympus, you nod. He shrugs, but it's the heaviest shrug you've seen him give. Sometimes, but mostly, I miss the certainty. Up there, everything is scripted. Down here, it's messy and wonderful. Mainstream historical fact. In Greek mythology, the gods of Olympus often descended to earth or were cast down for short periods, either to punish, guide, seduce, or spy on mortals. But very rarely did they stay long. Olympus had a hierarchy, and absences were noticed. Quirky tidbit: Apollo is one of the few Greek gods who had to do actual labor among humans twice. Once for slaying the Cyclopes, Zeus was not pleased, and once for killing the sons of Niobe. Both times, he was sentenced to servitude. That's right, divine community service. As the rain slackens into drizzle, Apollo steps into the courtyard and raises his arms. He closes his eyes as the last droplets fall onto his skin, like he's being baptized in humility. You watch, wondering if any of the gods are watching him from above, judging or simply ignoring. Want to see where it started? He asks. You follow him up a narrow path, rocky and slippery from the storm. Cypress trees line the trail like silent witnesses. At the crest, you find a tiny stone altar, no taller than your knees. Cracked, mossy, forgotten. Apollo kneels. This, he says, was the first offering I ever received here. A boy left a string of olives and sang my name wrong, called me Apuleios. He chuckles, but I showed up anyway. Did you bless him? He nods. His fever broke. His mother wept. That was enough. You kneel beside him, the ground damp and soft. You ever think they gave up on you? You ask. He doesn't answer immediately. Maybe. Or maybe they're waiting to see if I remember how to be divine without needing worship. Historians still argue whether ancient worship was reciprocal devotion or transactional survival. Some evidence points to gods who were feared more than loved, appeased to avoid punishment rather than invited as kind protectors. Apollo stands. Let's go. The walk back is silent but warm. The air is clearing. The stars return slowly, like shy guests arriving late to a party. That night, you find him sitting alone with a single candle. He's writing. You peek over his shoulder, expecting poetry or prophecy, maybe a song about lost divinity or olive oil diplomacy, but it's a list, a plain mortal list. Buy goat milk, fix sandals, mend temple roof leak, teach Elia to tune lyre, sweep altar steps. You point at it, smirking. Epic. He grins. My greatest scroll yet. You lie down nearby, letting the flicker of the candle lull your eyelids down. Do you think they'll take you back? You murmur. He doesn't look up. I think I don't need them to. The candle burns lower. Rain ticks softly against the shutters. Distant now. More memory than threat. You drift off, thinking about gods who clean temples, fix sandals, and mend more than just roofs. And as sleep takes you, the faint scent of olive wood and beeswax lingers in the room. Simple, grounding, utterly human. Morning arrives like a shy guest, soft, golden, and quiet. You wake to the sound of a broom sweeping stone. Outside the little house, Apollo is bent over the courtyard, gathering fallen pine needles with a kind of meditative calm. He's humming something low and steady, like a half-forgotten lullaby. You step out into the sunlight, stretching. You missed a spot. He raises an eyebrow. If I smite you with a dirty look, it still counts as divine wrath. You sit on the low wall, warming in the sun. The air smells of dust, time, and old gods trying to be better people. That's when the messenger arrives. Not Hermes, of course. He's far too busy orchestrating divine drama elsewhere. No, this one's a mortal, a boy from the village, dusty and nervous, holding a tightly rolled scroll sealed in wax. He hands it to Apollo without a word. Apollo reads it, then reads it again, then sighs so deeply the trees sway. Let me guess, you say. Heaven needs a temp. Worse, he mutters. They want me back, full time. You blink. You're being rehired? He nods, but it's not joy that flickers in his eyes. It's something closer to dread, mainstream historical fact. In many versions of myth, Apollo's punishment lasted only a year, after which he was reinstated to Olympus. This demotion to humanity served as a purification rite as well as a narrative device to explain why gods sometimes acted surprisingly relatable. Quirky tidbit: the Greeks believed a god's status wasn't permanent. Unlike modern monotheistic conceptions of eternal omnipotence, ancient gods could fall, be rebuked, or even die in some local traditions. The divine HR department was far more active than we imagine. So, you say carefully, are you going? I should. But, he sits beside you. But I've learned more in a year of sweeping floors and teaching lyre scales than I ever did composing odes in the sky. The scroll crinkles in his hand. He could burn it, toss it in the olive grove, ignore it and stay here, grounded, present, mortal in all the best ways. But instead, he hands it to you. Keep it, he says, in case I forget why I left in the first place. You take it and tuck it away. The rest of the day passes in that strange, elongated way moments do, when you know everything is about to change. You help him stack firewood. You roast figs. You laugh at a goat trying to chew on Apollo's sleeve. It's mundane. It's perfect. By nightfall, a chariot waits on the hill. Not a golden one. Not this time. Just a simple wagon pulled by mules. Symbolic humility, probably. Or the gods are just being passive-aggressive. Apollo gathers a small satchel. No harp, no armor, no laurels. Just a reed pen, a polished shell of ink, and a slice of bread wrapped in linen. "You're really going?" you whisper. He nods, but not forever. He clasps your shoulder. "Promise me something. Anything." "Keep writing." You smile. "Only if you promise to be slightly less smug." "No deal," he grins. Then he steps onto the wagon and rides into the dark. Historians still argue whether this myth, Apollo working for humans, was meant to humble the gods or elevate the mortals. Either way, it reminds us that divinity isn't in power, it's in compassion, in service, in the act of listening, teaching, and sweeping temple floors without complaint. You return to the little house. It feels bigger without him, or maybe just quieter. That night, you find his list again. Alsa Messi. Mend roof. Sweep altar. Teach Elia. You add a new line. Remember the God who chose to fall. And as you drift to sleep, you imagine him in Olympus, already breaking the rules again, asking too many questions, helping the wrong mortals, tuning a lyre just slightly off pitch, because perfect music is boring. And maybe, just maybe, the other gods will notice that he's changed. Or maybe they'll pretend not to. The way parents ignore the wild stories their kids tell just to hear them talk. Either way, he's still Apollo, but he's also something more. And in the morning, you'll sweep the courtyard yourself. You wake before dawn, for once without needing to. The little house hums with stillness. The air is cool, the hearth quiet. Outside, the stars are beginning to fade. That slow unraveling of night's cloak just before the sky blushes with light. You sit up, swing your legs over the side of the bed, and pause. There's no divine humming from the courtyard, no faint aroma of roasted barley, no sound of a broom catching on stone. Apollo is gone, but not erased. His sandals still rest by the door, too worn to be Olympian, too humble to be forgotten. A tiny sprig of olive rests on the windowsill, placed there like a signature in green ink. And there's something else, folded parchment, slightly scorched at one edge, wedged between 2 jars of pickled onions. You open it carefully. It's not a poem. It's not a prophecy. It's a to-do list. Again. Teach Elia to tune the 3rd string. Tell Minos the stars don't hate him. Buy more ink. Good black kind, not donkey sweat. And at the bottom, written sideways. Being human's harder than I thought, but worth it. You laugh softly. The kind of laugh that creaks open something warm in your chest. Because somehow, this is the point, isn't it? The gods, the myths, the scrolls, and rituals, none of them mattered as much as this. A cup of cool water at sunrise, a clumsy song on the lyre, a conversation shared by firelight. The immortals never needed more temples. They needed practice being people. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient Greeks created these myths not just to explain the cosmos, but to mirror their own struggles. Jealousy, pride, labor, love. The gods were not perfect, because perfection isn't relatable. They were flawed, because people are flawed. And the stories needed to resonate down here, not just up there. Quirky tidbit. Some versions of Apollo's exile suggest he didn't just serve once, but repeatedly. The myth was a loop, a cycle, like the seasons, or moon phases, or Mondays. Even divinity, apparently, has a performance review. You step outside. The world is stretching, yawning, dusting itself off for another day. You walk to the small garden and begin pulling weeds. Not because you must, not because the sun god demands it, but because it's peaceful. And because someone once did the same. Down the path, a sleepy figure approaches. Elia, cradling her lyre like a puppy. "You still gonna teach me?" she asks. You nod. "Only if you stop calling it that twangy thing." She grins. "Deal." You sit beneath the olive tree, and as the sun clears the horizon, you begin to tune the strings together, one by one, not perfectly, but well enough. And that, it seems, is divine. Historians still argue whether myths were meant to guide, to warn, or simply to entertain. But the best ones, like this one, do all three. They make us laugh, ache, and sometimes pick up a lyre or sweep a floor, because a god once did the same. And with that, the story closes. Not with thunder, not with fire, but with a quiet chord played in morning light. So now, as the last notes fade into stillness and the warmth of the sun wraps around you like an old linen robe, let your thoughts drift. Let them soften. Let them unspool like a scroll across the floor. You are here now, and that is enough. No need to remember the names of all the gods. No need to track every moral or meaning. Just rest in the idea that even the most powerful among us once needed to slow down, to live smaller, to learn to listen. You close your eyes, the lyre's echo still in your ears, the weight of the parchment light against your fingers, the scent of pine, sun, and ink lingering on the wind. Sleep is coming, not with fanfare, but with quiet, like Apollo on a mule-drawn cart, vanishing into the twilight with a smirk and a task list. Let it take you, gently. Let it carry you home.